I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and I was doing the math, and somehow I have known Robin Sloan for well over a decade, and I am so confused by that because it feels like Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore just showed up yesterday, and yet at the same time, it feels like it's always been around. And you may remember Sourdough from 2017, which treated food and baking like Penumbra treated books. And now Robin's back with a book that is just going to blow everyone's mind. We are 11,000 years in the future, and yet... well, I'm going to let Robin tell you about it a little more. Moonbound is out. And Robin, I am so happy to see you, dude. It has been way too long since we have shared space.
It has been way too long. Yeah, Miwa, thank you so much. And, just for folks listening, they need to know what a role you've played in both Penumbra and Sourdough, have been such a great ally and supporter and, tub thumper and everything else. So
I do what I can.
You're kind of part of the story of these books too, which is pretty exciting for me.
Well, thank you. And I'm happy to do it because, I love these books. And I love these books. And part of the fun is the verve, right? It's the storytelling. It's the you zig when I thought you were going to zag. It's, okay, we've got a Scooby Gang. And some of you are old enough to get that reference. And the rest of you, well, Google it. But the whole Scooby Gang thing happening in Penumbra. And then Sourdough, we've got Lois, who I adore, and her robot arm, and we're also going to go spoiler free on old books because why not? I think
that's good policy. Good policy.
We have a whole generation of readers who could have their minds blown by Penumbra and Sourdough. But I want to start with Moonbound because it's also your longest book. It took a minute. Yes, we've had a pandemic and you've started an olive oil company, and we're going to come to that later. Lots has happened, but we've got a 12-year-old kid. We've got a quest novel. We've got wizards and dragons and talking beavers. This, if ever there was a quintessential Robin Sloan novel, right? Like, I can see the Narnia and the Lord of the Rings and all of the influences, right? And you've talked about this in the past. But you do a thing where we're 11,000 years in the future, and yet I kind of felt like I was reading... not Renaissance fair per se, but you've given us sort of a medieval landscape. Lady of the Lake shows up. There's a sword and a stone. You think you know where this is going. You don't. Dude, where did all of this come from?
Well, of course, the answer is multi-part. But to take it back to Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, which you really did play such an important role in the kind of early life and success of, not a spoiler, but anyone who reads that book becomes aware very clearly that this is written by a person who loves the kind of books you just described, science fiction and fantasy, especially in those sort of classic modes. The narrator and protagonist of Penumbra has this series, and it's a fictional sort of made-up series, the Dragon Song Chronicles, that's near and dear to his heart, sort of formative, and they become important in the plot. And I'll say no more about that.
Right.
But the point is that was all there, I think, very, very clear to see. And so maybe it was just a matter of time, or maybe it was a matter of me, frankly, kind of gathering the courage and the skill, a little bit more, a sense of command and confidence of the whole craft to say, okay, I'm not going to just kind of wrap those things safely in homage and warm fuzzies. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try my best to produce something that could actually sit on that shelf. And, this is extravagant, but it's the shelf that includes folks like C.S. Lewis and Ursula K. Le Guin and Philip Pullman and lots more. So that's where I started. That the impulse was there from the start, but maybe it just took me a while to get the sense that I could actually participate.
Well, I'm glad you did, because I got to read the results. And I will totally own the fact, and I said this to you privately before, I did not grow up reading sci-fi and fantasy. I love the fact that 1 million and plus people have connected with books through sci-fi and fantasy, but it was just kind of not my thing. Mm-hmm. But for what you do for me as a reader, right, in all of the books, but especially Moonbound, is you're blowing up genre. Like, I know the tropes enough. I recognize a quest novel. You can also have a quest novel set in the suburbs of New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
There are certain bits and bobs of story, and you always start with the story. That's the thing. Like, no matter what you're pulling in or who you're pulling in, or, magic and all of this good stuff, but there's always a story first.
Yeah.
And this time you're playing with first person and third person point of view.
Yeah.
And we have to start there. No, we have to start there because
that's great.
I mean, honestly, for me, that was the biggest change. I was like, wait, what? Okay.
Right.
And I'm delighted because, I mean, obviously, you have now written 3 books, right? Each one gets you a little further, right?
Yeah.
When did you start thinking about this book, Moonbound, as we see it? I mean, we've got a great cast. We're going to leave out some of the people. We're totally going spoiler-free when we're talking about Moonbound. But this is not a small undertaking, Guy.
Yeah, that's true. It felt like, it's hard to sometimes talk about your own work in this way, but it felt to me like I was conscious of a sense of maturation and maybe being capable of things that were beyond me before. And I mean, to the point of point of view and all that kind of stuff, I think the first person in both Penumbra and Sourdough is totally successful, and I love returning to it myself. There is for sure a sense that I was doing that because it's what came most naturally to me. It was a mode that I already was very used to writing kind of for the internet and blogging, for years. It's always in this sort of, peppy, diaristic mode. And I was, as a reader myself, I like that energy, the way that a mind goes, into the observations on the page, and they can sort of braid together. And I think writers especially are aware of this, but I think readers are too. It comes with really important trade-offs, and most of those have to do with kind of the scope of the story itself. You get access to all these great tricks of being able to sort of have evaluation go in with description. It's all marbled together. But the one thing you can't do is cut to 1,000 miles away and a different character on a different journey, or all this other stuff that the third person masters get to do so easily and can be so powerful. So, and I don't think this is a spoiler really, because it's evident from the very, very first page. What I ended up, and I maybe struggle isn't quite the right word, but I workshopped this quite a bit in working on Moonbound and figuring out what was going to be the next step for me. Because the truth is, I discovered I wasn't ready to just give up first person entirely. There's too much to love, and I do. I feel like I'm good at certain parts of it, and I just love writing that way. So I found my way to this, as you say, a hybrid. And I don't know for sure, but I think there's a bit of invention here. The way our narrator is first person and has a very particular point of view and a position in the world, but also has these ways of reaching wider and also certainly deeper in time. It was fun. It was fun to develop, and I'm really, really proud of how it turned out on the page.
The voices are very sticky. And when I say voices, I mean our first person narrator, who people will encounter, but also this cast of characters. You've got Ariel, this 12-year-old who I'm very, very fond of. And, there's the wizard, Mallory, and there's some other folks, but, basically Ariel is being tested as a tiny person. He is not your average 12-year-old, but he's a pretty cool cat. And certainly, bad guys are bad guys. But 11,000 years in the future feels like a real choice.
Yes.
We got to start there because I laugh. I mean, my first thought was, okay, of course, it's Robin. Like, it's Robin. Fine, whatever. I'll go anywhere. But you do a thing where it feels very medieval, very sort of King Arthur's Round Table, but not. So you're pulling from all of these different traditions, right? It's like Asimov and the Foundation trilogy and King Arthur. I mean, I laughed. I think folks are going to laugh when they encounter your version of the Lady of the Lake. I was like,
right. Right. Well, that's the fun, right? That's the fun. It is like you say that, like, those bits of story that we all recognize to some degree. And, the more widely you read, maybe the larger your grammar of, all these little tropes and bits and images and stuff that you recognize. And so certainly as a reader, you have some that are your favorites. And I think you also, as a writer, have some that are your favorites. And, when it comes time to sit down and put them together, like a Lego set, right, and choose, it turns out you can just not choose. You can also say, I want them all. I want to mash them all together in some way. And that raises challenges of its own. You don't want it to become a like the way that all colors of paint mixed together become like brown.
Mud.
That's not right. That's not
Mud.
actually what you want. But there are other ways to mix paint and to present a full spectrum. And I do. I mean, I think of both in terms of the number of references. Like, so I think some of them are very clear and I hope fun on the page, and others perhaps a little more hidden for only the truly nerdiest readers. But the full spectrum of references, and then certainly the scale in time and space, I hope it does create a sense of a fuller spectrum, fuller bandwidth novel, certainly than my previous two. And that's exciting. That's exciting for me because I like reading that kind of work myself, to stuff that kind of asks me or challenges me to think longer in time and bigger in space.
Which brings me to a line that is going to stick with me for a while, and it's sort of from early to middle of the book, right? So it's not right up, but you're I'm not going to tell people who says it, but the present is a function of the future, not the past. And I mean, if that isn't the spine of this story, yes, it's a classic quest story. Yes, there's, good guys and bad guys and people make choices and there are talking beavers, and I promise we will get to the talking beavers because they're really wild in the best possible way. But I want to talk about this because the way Moonbound reads, right, it's this intersection of past and future that I haven't seen done, certainly not recently, but it's tricky to pull off.
Mm-hmm.
And then here you are saying, and I know this is you, right? Like, yes, you're saying it through a character, but I know it's you, which is why we're playing with this line. The present is a function of the future. I need you to walk me through that.
I do think that part of it, I mean, it connects to that challenge, right? Directly back to that challenge of 11,000 years, because the way I see it, and I could be wrong, this is just how I've sort of formulated this in my mind. When we think about the future, collectively as readers, as a society, whatever, it's like there are these levels, and some of them are very close at hand imaginatively. So, if I challenged you to imagine 20 years from now, sort of a cyberpunk dystopia, you've got a stock of movies. You're like, got it, Blade Runner, which Blade Runner, all this other stuff. It's just really firmly there. There's this rich stockpile to draw on. And of course you can play with that and, subvert it, whatever, but it's there, right? I could challenge you to go further and I could say, okay, forget all that. Like, come on, a few hundred years. And there we've got Star Trek, obviously, and all that kind of Star Trek-y stuff. And again, there's stuff in the toolbox to play with. But then something happens, I think it's really interesting and actually sort of telling. You go further than that and not too much further. 3,000 years, 4,000 years, like there's just not a stockpile. Now, of course, science fiction readers know there are things to draw on, and it's Asimov and there's other stuff out there, but it's not as rich. It's certainly not as widely sort of imagined. And I would just say, as a writer, it gets more challenging because there's just less to riff off of. There's fewer like markers along the road. And for that reason, I have always really admired the writers who do that. And, that includes folks like Asimov and Leckie, I think, pushes really, really far into the future like that. The great Ian M. Banks, amazing science fiction writer who I think is kind of the best of all. And the reason I admire them, it's not only literary, although it's largely literary, and this kind of finally answers your question, is because I think there's really value in that. I think there is incredible intellectual and really like actually political and moral value in actually imagining a future that's not ruin and apocalypse. It doesn't have to mean that it's like, all Candyland at all, but it's something. And I just think that the use of that is actually really profound. And, maybe it's a little silly to say so, but I just don't think that we, the big collective we of people in this world, do quite enough of it. So that's one of the reasons I want to insist that the present is a function of the future. And so let's imagine futures that can kind of shine back and change the things we do now. Right.
Do you know Ruha Benjamin's work? She's a professor at Princeton. Okay. When we're done, I'm going to send you some stuff because this is part of the landscape that she's talking about. And we've had her on the show before. I'll drop a link to her show notes because it's exactly what you're talking about. And she's teaching a whole generation of college students at Princeton to basically do what you're talking about. It's like, how do we think about what's next? How do we think about building the actual place that we want to live in. And we're not talking about the Jetsons, right? Like we were all supposed to have flying cars by now and and when I think about some of the technology that's in my, like, I grew up fighting over the phone with my brother, right?
Right,
like,
right.
My mother was like, no one has phones in their bedrooms. There's one phone. It's in the kitchen. Good luck.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, right? Or even if like how we consume music, all of this stuff. And, vinyl records are back and it kind of makes me laugh. I'm like, oh, I don't have the energy to maintain the space or the collection. And, when you're younger, you endless amounts of space in your parents' house. And now it's like, is there space for that? Can it live here?
Yeah. There's that saying that I'm sure you've heard this or maybe even said it yourself from time to time, that science fiction is always about the present. And of course, duh, it can only be. All we can do is reflect and refract the things that are around us and the concerns of our moment. And so, on a first cut, it's right because it has to be. But I always want to insist that it's like, okay, maybe it's only 95% true. I want to leave that little extra 5% for the real future, for the imagination of the future, and for that powerful sense of like the weirder the better. Forget the consensus dreams of flying cars and even spaceships for that matter, and warp drives and all that stuff. Like there are folks out there imagining such strange possibilities for our bodies, for matter and energy and economies, and you're like, I'm like, yeah, I think that maybe that stuff is not just about the present. That's the stuff that actually makes us think like, well, how else could it be? Maybe I don't have to share the phone, But
also the tech is really only as good as the people who are programming it. I mean, big ideas have their place, but, AI does sort of roll through Moonbound in unexpected ways and expected ways. And it is certainly, we're having all sorts of conversations. But if you're training AI, buy the books that you're training your AI on, like pay the writers, come on. And I do think, obviously it has its place. But again, the tech is always just as good as the people. So we have to look at this from all sides. Right?
And again, in a way, the corollary to the present is a function of the future is that like also you never escape the past. There is it never goes away. This is not really a spoiler because it's so nerdy. The sort of fake science that I mentioned in the text in Moonbound, it's Gibson-Faulkner theory. And this is what humans have used in our near future to transform their society. And it's named, I don't say this in the book, so I guess you could say this is sort of an Easter egg. It's named for me, the sort of intersection of two just powerful little epigrams. One is, of course, William Gibson. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. But then the other one is William Faulkner, who said, the past isn't dead. It's not even past. Yeah. And I think from there, you get that sense of like really our moment now being in this really like dynamic tension. And in a way, the best thing you can do, the worst thing you can do is just stare at your phone and imagine that all that's possible is what you see around you. The converse, and I think all good writers do this, is you look eagerly deep into the past and with curiosity into the future, and you try to draw in those threads to now somehow.
Well, I get standing with one foot in each camp, but I think the story is always the building block, right? Even if you're talking about the future, like you still start with the stories. That's part of the fun of Moonbound. And, I know I keep coming back to King Arthur, but it's fun to see this stuff where I'm like, wait a minute, what is happening here? And it's a good reference point to use. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but John Steinbeck also did a version of...
I did know that. I did know that. Like, sort of unfinished in the end. It was sort of
I've read part of it, and I get it. And of course, Steinbeck's going to do it. But I'm like, that is not the first thing that I think of when I think of John Steinbeck.
No.
But it makes perfect sense because of his generation and where he came out of and all these other things. But this world, right, is still built from story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not just because it's you, right? It wouldn't function without the stories that the characters are telling each other. It wouldn't function with the stories that our narrator, our first person narrator, let's call him that, especially that voice and how story intersects and how story is processed through that POV. I mean, we can't build society. We can't build tech. We can't build stuff without story.
I don't know. I think maybe the talking beavers of Shivalite and Shadow Tackle might disagree. I think they're trying to see if they can do it, and
they are trying
with complications.
Yes, but I think ultimately they don't succeed. They might try.
No, maybe not.
But we got to talk about the beavers, because I think many of us have been in meetings where you're like, oh, I feel like you have taken some old work culture stuff and put it on the beavers. What? Beavers, where did they come from? Why beavers? Why not? But
why not? I mean, beavers, a lot of things, and this is true, I think, for any writer who reads widely, you kind of dive into some natural world thing or biology or animal behavior. And here's the truth of it. You can imagine as hard as you want, and you just will never match the real world and the weirdness and the majesty. And so a while back, I went on a beaver tangent, as one does. And it's just, they really, they deserve our respect and our esteem. Mm-hmm. For as much havoc as humans have, created on this planet and the way we've remade it, beavers have been remaking ecologies for way, 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 way longer. And like there's the line, one of the beavers, who of course now can speak for itself and is part of this sort of corporate global mega corporation in the world of Moonbound, says, we are the original architects of Earth. Mm-hmm. And that's just true. I mean, that's not a bold claim. That's just simply true. Thinking about, I actually think it was probably two things that came together. One was all that research and just the incredible, the real power of this species and that just totally predates humanity. And then, of course, the other thing is the Chronicles of Narnia, where in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first, proper denizens of Narnia that the children meet are Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. And I think that it's almost like a chemical reaction. Those two things came together, and I said, the first proper denizen of my future, not Narnia, but sort of fantastical Earth that young Ariel meets can be a beaver, but it'll be a different kind of beaver. I mean, that's fun. That's just, you can't, at that point, it's like, you're on it, you're on your way.
Well, as you can tell, I'm still delighted by the beavers. It was just one of those moments where you're like, yep, I'm going to go here.
Yeah.
We are here. I'm going to go here. I need to follow this kid who is a very intrepid 12-year-old. And curious where Ariel sort of comes from. I mean, you'd always said you'd had Clay's voice from Penumbra pretty easily. And Lois from Sourdough is not an extension of Clay, but they fit in a universe together.
Absolutely.
I mean, they could bump into each other at a coffee shop. Yep. So again, it's the time, it's the swinging, it's the cadence of the sentences, all of this kind of stuff, right? But Ariel is a new kind of kid.
Yeah.
And I need to know where our new kid showed up.
Well, and it was interesting to develop that, because as we've discussed, in a way the main character, certainly the voice, the engine of the story, is our protagonist. Even though, no spoilers, the protagonist has a certain can't necessarily do a lot, and so the protagonist sort of along for the ride in a lot of ways. But the protagonist, the narrator, I should say, is the one with opinions and powerful desires and certainly a lot of knowledge. And so, and sometimes a bit of snark too, making some judgments about the things that they're seeing. And so in that way, Ariel, and I think that pushed Ariel into this role of being a bit more of a straight man. I mean, if you met Ariel in the real world, you would like him, but you'd be like, oh, that kid's a little too serious, like, hey, you want to go play ball? No? Okay. In the corner with a Game Boy or whatever, Nintendo Switch or a book. And just a sort of self-possession and seriousness, and certainly a kind of isolation. But in that way, it becomes, I don't want to give people the wrong impression, but maybe just the tiniest hint of like a buddy movie with these two characters. And, the oddly, the wackier one is this strange sci-fi entity that we're hearing from. And then the serious one, who's got to keep us on task, is young Ariel, 12 years old.
But also, Ariel doesn't really know what he doesn't know, and that's kind of the fun of it, right? Think of yourself at 12, right? We don't know anything. If our parents are not paying attention, we are not in good shape. 12-year-olds they're not children, they're not adolescents, they're 12. It's like a whole new, it's just wild, right? I don't know a single 12-year-old who went through Yeah, they're all, I mean, I was weird. 12-year-olds are just weird. And so he's this weird little man.
And your point about not knowing what you don't know is actually, that's foundational here, because one of the just kind of a craft thing, I guess you could say, one of the challenges in figuring out how this whole thing was going to get structured was, I had this idea, this ambition to present a really new world. Yeah, talking beavers are the least of it. I mean, it's all new. There's not even a kind of point of once you get outside that sort of Arthurian mode, which is a little more familiar.
Right.
It's really like, whatever. Don't take anything for granted. And I had it in my head that I've read some other books and other kinds of stories where everything is new and our main character doesn't know anything, as
right.
Ariel doesn't. And it actually is not fun to read. It's not as, I don't think, just as a reader, I don't think it's as fun to read a book where the voice is kind of like, huh? What? Huh? Because so much of the fun of reading actually is that knowing assessment, where the narrator says, yes, it's like that, or it was a person like that. And you just
right.
want that. And I do think that comes from maturity. It comes from having reference points and all that other stuff. So again, I feel like so many things in writing become these sort of equations you're trying to balance, or story problems you're trying to solve. And in this case, I was committed to having this young protagonist, and I was committed to having a wide open new world, but I didn't want it to be annoying or kind of like, oh, give me a break to read. And so that yet another reason that this voice just kind of, as I developed and kind of perfected it, or really got the engine turning, it just felt like a solution to all these problems and really made the whole thing go.
So more about structural engineering then of this story. It's twice as long as either of the early books. The cast is definitely larger. We are leaving out some folks deliberately.
Yeah.
Time moves tightly. You've got five sections of the book. Right?
Yeah.
And within each section, though, you've got these very tight, short chapters where lots happens.
Yeah.
And it's a very propulsive narrative. I do not remember The Hobbit feeling propulsive when I read it. And I was young when I read it, and maybe I should go back to it, but I probably won't. But the pages fly, partially because I want to know what's next, but partially because you're doing this trick where you're just pushing me through the story, and I didn't even realize it until I was like, wait a minute, I'm done. What just happened here?
Good to hear.
And
That's good
to hear. I read pretty quickly. I do read pretty quickly, but at the same time, when you're reading something that is structured to keep moving forward all the time. So for you, as the dude who made all of this up, are we starting with an outline? Are we starting with a blank screen and a cursor?
It's funny you mentioned The Hobbit. I was radicalized a couple of years ago when I was radicalized in the context of planning and improvising on the page and all that kind of stuff. Because as you know, or your listeners definitely have heard, Tolkien, the great architect, did it all ahead of time. The languages, the myths, all that stuff. That's what I thought too, and it's a neat story. I read this series of books, among the nerdiest books I've ever read in my entire life, which is saying something. And they're essentially it's a compendium called The History of Middle Earth, and they present successive drafts of all the different books with commentary by Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R.'s son, and kind of in a way his literary partner. And in this book, in particular, the development of the Lord of the Rings, the great centerpiece, you see that, it is true that some was developed. There were these languages waiting in reserve and these myths and stuff, but it all comes out in the drafts. All the good stuff, characters that we love, the whole mechanism of the One Ring, the thing that there is a lord of. Draft one, it's sort of nonsensical and hazy and doesn't really work. And then, of course, by the final draft, it's the truly iconic story we know. And so I kind of went, oh my gosh, this the whole framework is wrong. There's not. If Tolkien isn't even the great planner, then nobody's really the great planner. Of course, you have guideposts and images maybe you want to get to. You're like, I would like there to be talking beavers. That seems like that would be cool. Like, that raises a lot of questions, and you answer the questions on the page. I actually don't think there's any other way to do it. And writers who claim to be great planners, I think maybe they doth protest too much. But I will say, And this kind of connects to that sense of a bigger scale, certainly, you know, more pages, and just also, I think, a somewhat more deliberate structure. And I'm glad. I mean, I'm just very, very glad and edified to hear that it worked for you. Is that I finally, it only took 10 plus years, but I think I finally have conquered one of my own worst habits as a writer, or I don't know what you call it, a burden, which is that because I was trained in so many ways on the internet, I always wrote, and I think this is, if you watch for this on the page of Penumbra, I think you detect it actually pretty clearly, unfortunately. I always wrote with a kind of a sense of frantic, I don't know, anxiety that people would close the tab, even though there is no tab. They're like, no, they're in the middle of a book, but still just there's that sense you get from the digital of like always competing against some other distraction. So you better like get in and get out and be efficient and never let up and all these other things. And obviously in some ways that's valuable because it can really compress a lot of energy into a paragraph. But I think in most ways, certainly in a book, you're just like, dude, slow down. Let's have some fun here. And so I think in Moonbound, I actually finally learned to let it breathe and trust that people just wanted to learn more about this world and not, go read an article on CNN.com.
But also Penumbra is a different entity entirely. And that frantic movement on the page works because it's who the characters are. Because, I mean, if you haven't read Penumbra, just go grab a copy because, again, you'll fly through it. It is very sort of, hey, kids, let's figure this out. And like who's on our side and who's not. And there's secret societies and there's all sorts of stuff. There's a wild bookstore, which I'm very fond of. But
yes, me too.
I don't think that's a bad thing for Penumbra. I really don't. I think it fits. I mean, yeah, the sentences are shorter. I mean, were you working at Twitter then? I can't remember. No, you were done with Twitter.
I was done at Twitter finally. But there is some overlap there. There is some overlap in terms of the drafting, the composition. So yeah, it's Twitter energy for sure, kind of laced in there. Yeah.
I mean, when we were all trying to figure out what 140 characters meant, and in some cases, right, like true story, if you're writing shelf talkers in stores, like there is kind of a sweet spot, and you do have to sort of flip on that. How many characters do I have? Word counts work in a certain context, but character counts, like you can't ignore them.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
You can't ignore them. And this is a constant conversation that I have with folks, which sounds a little too inside baseball, but actually it's not, because how do you connect a human being to a story?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Like what's the thing that's going to make them stop and go, hey, I want to be part of this world. I want to spend time with you. I'm actually not hugely invested in Arthurian legend. I was very invested in Ariel and his companion.
That's great. That's great to hear.
And I was also invested because I know with your voice, like there are going to be no wasted words.
Yeah.
Even though the scope of this book has changed, but I'm also like, where are we going? What is, and that trick again of taking sort of these foundational pieces of story, right? Foundational pieces of global story, and turning it into an entirely new thing. I'm like, well, isn't that why we do this thing, right?
Yes.
Like, isn't this why we turn a lens on like where we've come from and the sort of myths and legends and stories that have built us, right? Like there's been a boom in, mythological retellings. Pick your area of the world and folks are doing a thing.
Yeah.
And that's great. I mean, if it brings you to a new place or a new way of thinking, rock on. Like I've said it before, I genuinely believe there's a book for everyone. But I really did kind of have my mind blown because of all of the moving parts in Moonbound. And part of me is thinking, too, that you used to be quite the gamer.
It's true. And
I'm thinking, well, so the influences aren't just the literary. I mean, certainly there's some movie stuff, right?
Yeah,
there's a cinematic movement to Moonbound. But there's also some game stuff in here. And I want to talk about the game stuff for a second. I had a moment as a bookseller where I was like, oh, these video games, man, like an entire generation of readers is going to be like, peace out. I can really actually literally be the hero of my own journey. I can choose all of the things that, and I kind of don't have the patience for video games. I'm okay if I crash into the wall. I'm like, ugh, whatever. I have a thing. But I think the way we interact with story has been deeply influenced by
Absolutely.
video
Absolutely
games.
agree.
I mean, certainly movies have been made out of video games. Television shows have been made out of video games. Like, I mean, these are not small budget things, right? It's not like the days of typing. You and Charlie Yu years ago did an interview for me for the old Barnes & Noble Review. And both of you grew up, playing these video games where you're typing the text in.
Yes. Yes.
It's like, we are standing in a dark cave.
Yes. So it's like, oh my gosh, the primordial games. Yeah.
But I genuinely believe that those of us who've come up through that sort of work, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, right? Like, same thing. It's like
exactly.
built around that storytelling. So,
yeah, I mean, it was interesting too, like even to bring Tomorrow and Tomorrow into it, which I love, just truly one of my favorites of the last few years. It just goes to show that there's so many ways in which that cross-pollination can happen, because that's one that just sets its story in that rich, weird, interesting world of video games over many, many years. So that's one way to do it. Right. And of course, there are the movies, TV shows, and some books and sort of prose adaptations that just say, oh yeah, I like this story. I actually want to just lift this story and this world building from the game. There's many more kinds, but I think the kind that's most relevant to me, and I think this is true for plenty of other writers too, is a little more structural. And it has to do with, or structural/emotional. It has to do with not the specific stories of games.
Right.
Because a lot of them, especially the games I played, were like, talk about tropey. I mean, it was pretty basic, pretty basic stuff. But to your point, the way they put you into it creates a possibility for these effects that are really special. And just to describe one that for me is powerfully kind of motivating in Moonbound, I remember so vividly playing these kind of now very primitive role-playing games on the Super Nintendo in my computer, where, of course you start the game and you're just this little pixelated blob and you have nothing and you're not good at anything. And your world is literally like 26 pixels in a sea of darkness. And that's how it begins. And you're like, okay, I guess first thing I got to do is find out what's out there. And as you go, you literally are sort of building a bubble of light in the map and you're learning what's out there. And then at a certain point, you kind of will sometimes pop out into like almost a different level of map. And you realize that everything you were exploring was, just one village or just one little region. And suddenly you literally see the whole world at a different zoom level. And the genius of some of these games is they kept that going and going and going. There's one in particular, truly a formative literary experience for me, where you've been playing for hours and hours and hours and you'd seen so much, but then you're given an airship, and you get into it and it lifts up off the ground. You didn't know that was like possible in this game until this point. It lifts up, the ground shrinks beneath you, and you realize the entire world that you were exploring so eagerly is just one continent in a whole world of other continents. And it's just this, really like dizzying, and that sense of an expanded scope. In retrospect, having also now like lived, and now I'm an adult and, have some autonomy and stuff, I realize there's a real congruence there to the actual experience of growing up and having the scope, not just of a story, but of your life go, oh, I don't just live on a street, I live in a town. I don't just live in a town, I live in a big city. Oh, I don't just live in a big city, I live in the world. I can go to Tokyo, I can go to New York City, whatever. And so in a way, I think that's why it's so appealing for kids and grownups alike. And also, I think there's something actually real and instructive there. So that's all to say, Moonbound begins that process. And if I'm able to, I want to be able to continue it through more books in this series. But if or when people get that feeling of a zoom in Moonbound, they can connect that straight back to Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, played by Robin in his basement in 1994.
Okay, that was a reference. The zooming out part I get, but I'm happy to have the reference because I know that will ping for a lot.
It is. We again, it is, and it's good and broad-minded to remember that although books are, for some of us, the center, they're kind of the foundation stones of our heart. Everybody's got other influences, and the way they connect to each other and refract and sort of combine is super cool. Comics and music and video games and everything else alongside the books.
But I think whatever brings you to story ultimately will bring you to a book eventually. I've always felt that way.
I think so too.
You may not have to love James Baldwin the way I love James Baldwin, but someone else does, right? Yeah. I just want to connect you with the thing that you love, because it's fun. I mean, that's the thing that I've always appreciated about your work. And the fact that you blow up genre in all of, right? Like, there's a little bit of sci-fi or fantasy in all of these books, you're doing Robin, which I love. Like, why do we have to put names on everything? Like, why can't you just have a fun, playful, bouncy book? I mean, yeah, you're talking about, some cultural stuff that we should all be looking at and going, oh, right, okay. But why can't we have a sense of possibility? Why can't we have a sense of play? I mean, why can't we sit with big ideas that are, sort of hidden in fun ways in conversations between characters that you wouldn't otherwise expect? And that's like, I so appreciate that sense of play and possibility, because, I mean, if you are going to create a world, right, like, it can be dour, it can be but also, it can also be Tuesday in America, right? Like,
yeah.
There is stuff out in the world where I'm like, if you engage with the news in any way, shape, or form, but why can't we say, well, what's next and how do we build it?
Yeah, I agree. And, there's a metaphor that has taken root in my mind, just for myself. I'm not necessarily trying to proselytize it for other writers or anybody thinking about books, but it has, I don't know why, it just really clicked for me. You think about chefs or cooks, people who prepare food for other people. And even, a great chef realized that top notch, doing the, top innovative, creative, top of their game. Like, no one would dispute that one of the primary things they're doing is producing pleasure. I mean, that's what it's for. It's to put down a plate of food in front of you and have you go, oh man, I'm glad this is here. And it's, I mean, not just pleasure, but pleasure and nourishment, I should say. I do think there's some exceptions to that in the world of cuisine. It's like the fine dining where they're like, here is a single raw carrot and a stone. Lick the stone and only look at the carrot, like that kind of stuff.
We had that story, remember? Yeah. We had that story as kids.
Yeah. And the analogy to literature and to writing, I think is pretty clear. I think, this is my opinion, but I think maybe there's a hair too much, just lick the stone and look at the carrot on the shelf these days. A sense of pure challenge or kind of like foreboding without the attendant like pleasure and nourishment. Right. And whether I'm right or wrong about that, I am committed to everything else, anything else that these books are doing. I want it to be a good plate of food that you really love.
Well, and I'm going to take that metaphor in a slightly different turn for a second, because again, I do believe that there's a book for everyone. It's like, just because it's not, there's plenty of stuff out there that is not for me, but I am delighted when people connect with whatever it's just absolutely. There are a couple of books where I'm like, nothing published recently, but there are a couple of things where I'm like, that book. But you have talked about books as disruptive technology.
Of course, yeah.
And I want to go there for a second because I love the idea that this pile of paper and ink, because I love a printed book. I can read in a million different ways.
Likewise.
Audio's great. I mean, I need story, right? This is just what I need to function as a human in the world. But I do love a paper book, especially when I'm prepping for the show, because for whatever reason, it just sits differently, right?
Yep. Sits in your mind differently. I mean, truly. Yeah, it does. It's organized, gets organized in you. There's almost like a spatial ghost of the book in your brain. Oh, it's so true. It's so true.
And you can just go back and find moments. I mean, I destroy galleys. Everyone knows this, but at the same time, like, I make notes as I go and I can still always find them again. Whereas in a digital, it's slightly different. Like, I'm scrolling and I'm just like, am I there yet? Am I there yet? Am I there yet? Whereas a book, you can just flip through it and be like, right, I know exactly where I'm going. But I want to talk about books as disruptive technology. Because again, this comes back to this idea, right, that the present is the future and we don't, like, books have been around for a really long time.
Yeah, a long time and not a long time. It's sort of, you kind of can choose your own adventure in terms of the period of time you look at. Like, if you think, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I've read enough weird books now that the year 1500 does not seem that remote to me anymore. But and at that time, we're far from the mass market paperback and real access to, sort of popular access to books. But that's the first time anybody makes a book that's like you can carry around with you. So as recently as that, in printing and all this Minucius, who I love, in Venice, printing these books, and that was a radical thing, that it was a book you could take with you instead of sort of book as furniture, which is really what they all were before. Often chained to the tables upon which they sat, because of course they were so precious and so valuable and so eminently stealable. So in some ways they are still new. And I would add, maybe from, this is the era of digitization, 1990 or 2000 onward, it has been remarkable to see the modern book, the modern hardcover, the modern trade paperback only seem better and better and more capable and perfect with each passing year. As the digital, with all of it, obviously it's powerful and has these great potential. You can access so much, and we can do this. We're chatting and we're talking over a long distance, and that's phenomenal. It's like, this is sci-fi right here.
Right.
And yet we just all have experienced the rug pull, of like, oh, and wait, I don't have it anymore. Wait, it disappeared from the streaming service. Oh, I can't actually buy it anymore. I can't give it to my friend. I mean, how about that? You get a digital book, and, again, just like you, I'm happy to read digital books, but you can't give it to your friend. That is just what a travesty. So, boy, print books in the 21st century, just getting better.
And if you're lucky, a writer you like will recode a tap essay as an app.
Yeah.
You got to talk about Fish for a second, because I did not know Fish had come back.
Yes.
It's another way to interact with story. You can find it on whatever, mobile device you use. It is possible to find it in the App Store or whatever.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of the way you play with image and text. And I'm hoping folks will take a minute, especially you could be scrolling through your phone, yes, but you could also be tapping on Robin's essay.
That's right.
Because we're talking about like and love, and, books are exactly that kind of thing where you like it, you love it.
You return to it. I mean, that's, again, it really, that's Fish, this app / tap essay thing is germane to the question of print books, because, again, for all the power of the stuff that flows through our screens, one of the things that I noticed years ago was that I would see something and think it was just super cool and then never think about it again. It just is lost in the flood. And books are different. And, I think one of many things that makes books so different is, especially a print book, and I think maybe uniquely a print book, is that its physicality is actually quite stubborn. There's books behind you, books behind me here where we're sitting, and they don't just disappear on the third page of search results. They stay here in this physical space, kind of saying, hey, remember me? I'm here, until you pick them up again or throw them away, or maybe put them in a box in the basement, and then they sort of do disappear. But thinking about this stuff made me want to, I don't know, sort of make an argument about that and talk about digital things and books. And I made this app, but then, of course, even the app itself, it all ends up being kind of fractal and the snake eating its own tail. The app itself, I made it, I published it, just the way you publish a book. But time passes, and of course, in the digital realm, it's so ironic. Things rot. They just crumble. And so within a couple of years, all the OSs had advanced. People couldn't load it anymore. People had it on their phone, but they couldn't read it. The iPhone would say this app needs to be updated by its creator. That never happens with a print book. A print book, once you have it and it works, there's never some OS update that renders it incompatible, which is, it sounds sort of silly, but it's actually profound. In the 21st century, that's a profound offering. So it was. I guess you could say I took a cue from the real serious, foundational properties of print publishing. And I said, you know what? All right, I'm gonna try to be a good publisher, and I'm gonna make this available again. It took some work. It took some engineering, but now it's back, and you can, at least for a few more years, until, I don't know, the phones will all change again, but at least for now you can read it again.
And it's fun. And I do, if you're engaging with text, if you're engaging with ideas, if you're engaging with story, it's just fun. It's fun, and it's zippy, and, nothing wrong with any of that. But before I let you go, and of course, the hour has flown, because that's what we do around these parts.
Yes.
Fat Gold. We need to talk about Fat Gold for a second, because you disappear every October and November. You are out literally overseeing an olive harvest.
Yes. Yeah.
And didn't this come out of Sourdough? Weren't you developing this idea as Sourdough was did we have this conversation at dinner?
I think we did. And they actually have a shared origin. Of course, it's, I joke that you spend long enough in the San Francisco Bay Area and you will start an artisanal food company. It is just, it will just happen. Unless you're like, you have to like dodge, duck and weave to avoid finding yourself with like, oh no, now I make granola. Oh, what happened? Oh no, I sell kombucha. How did that? It got me. They have a shared origin. Sourdough, of course, a novel set in the weird, wacky, wonderful world of technology and food in the Bay Area.
Right.
Fat Gold, a part of the weird, wonderful, wacky world of food. I just, have a couple key influences. One of them is my spouse, who is part of that world, and for many years. And, turns out it's really interesting. It's fascinating with interesting. I mean, this is going to sound like I'm talking about a novel, and I sort of am. Interesting characters, weird schemes, lots of cool things to learn about everything. And I will say, too, this probably is not surprising, but as a writer and as someone who spends a lot of time in front of a computer, in a world of abstraction and imagination, it has turned out to be very, very fruitful and healthy and, I don't know, sanity preserving to have this other thing I work on that's very physical and tactile, and it's the real world, and it's like pencils down and go make a real thing. That's nice.
Pencils down and make a real thing, but also when you're writing quest novels, the characters do work some stuff out while they're walking.
They do.
So, we do have to remember to be physical creatures.
We do. Actually. And as soon as you said that, I realized that it's like self-incriminating. Of course, when I'm doing all this Olive stuff, I'm just daydreaming the entire time. And, they're like, oh, yeah, talking beavers. Oh, yeah, there could be a wandering robot. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. So yes, it turns out also not only is physical activity a great tonic, a little bit of that sort of washing the dishes downtime is great for dreaming and imagination and that kind of stuff.
And I'm also happy to hear, and you said this sort of very quickly in passing, but you were like, maybe there will be more books in this Moonbound series, because I do feel like you left a very big door open.
Absolutely.
At the end of this book, which was very satisfying. I'm really hoping to see more of Ariel and his world, because I really like this kid. I mean,
me too.
Sometimes you need a kid who's a little wise beyond and he's accidentally wise because he just doesn't know how to engage with the world. Yeah. And he's a fun character, and he's he's very relatable. I mean, I think all of us are figuring out, what the world looks like. You don't have to be 12
guilty of taking themselves a little bit too seriously sometimes, sort of like, I think, look left, look right. I think I'm the protagonist. I think, everyone on the train quietly thinking, I think I'm the main character, It's great. It's like the human condition.
It's nice to have a little wonder back, right? Yeah. Like, it's nice to have a little wonder. And Robin, it is always really good to see you. I'm laughing that we're doing this over screen because it's been a minute, and I'm like, at least we have tech.
At least we have tech.
This is where it's useful, and we get to hang out and do this. Because otherwise, we would just be trying to figure out schedules and all of that kind of thing. And this is like, no, we can just hang out in the ether.
In the ether. It is. Well, it has been too long. And I'm, that's a good enough reason to write books. And hopefully, as you say, truly more books in this Moonbound series, because it'll just be a great excuse to get to chat with you, Miwa, because it's just always such a pleasure.
It's really good to see you. Thank you so much. Okay, so Moonbound's out now. If you haven't read Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, please start there. And Sourdough, also fabulous. You can read Sourdough before you read Penumbra. All I'm saying is, if you haven't somehow caught those two, they are a fun read. And this is the perfect time of year.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Top Off. We're going to recommend a couple of wonderful books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Moonbound. I'm Marc at my Barnes & Noble store in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by one of my favorite book buddies in the universe, Donald, over in the Detroit area. Why don't I go ahead and have you kick things off, because you've got a great one.
All right. I chose to go along with Moonbound, a book by Amal El Mothar and Max Gladstone. It is called This Is How You Lose the Time War. It is an absolutely fascinating, wonderful book that shares a lot in common with Moonbound, especially around topics like intelligence. And that's beyond humanity, right? We're dealing with AI. We're dealing with an interesting blend of science and nature. It's time bending, but it's also a time-traveling love story. So we've got so many threads. Both deal with the effects of war as it's happened and as it's ongoing. This particular book also has dueling agents, so you've got that kind of espionage spy feel to it. And science versus nature and how they're intertwined, but how they're at battle with each other in this world. And much like the artificial intelligence consciousness theme in Moonbound, we're dealing with a sentient fungus that is in partnership with one of the two main characters in a story. So a little bit of The Last of Us. This book, though, however, as everything that I've just mentioned sounds like it would also be a massive book, is under 200 pages. So it's a great book to pick up after you finish Moonbound, just to kind of continue with that type of story and style without having to, again, dive into another 500-page book. It also has a really great line that I always like to look for in every book that I pick that just kind of jumps out and will pull the reader in. And for this one, it's, I want to meet you in every place I've ever loved. Listen to me, I am your echo. I would rather break the world than lose you. Now, if that doesn't catch you as a reader, whether you like science fiction, fantasy, romance, just general fiction, I don't know what else would pull you in. And then the last little bit about this is I always like to find a theme song to a book. So like if you're watching a movie adaptation, what would be a theme song? So, take a listen to Melissa Etheridge's song, I've Loved You Before. That is absolutely the theme song to this book. And that book, again, is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Mathar and Max Gladstone. That is what I have for this week. Mark, what do you have?
Oh my gosh, you almost made me start crying with that line, because having known that story very well and that significance of that line, whew, you almost got me there, Donald. But I will push on and talk about, first of all, my excitement for a new Robin Sloan. I really love this author. I think he has this very unique playfulness that he infuses into his writing. And he writes so well. But it also feels like he's letting us in on the fun. Just a fantastic author. So in keeping with the fun aspect, I decided to go with a book called Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis. This is Barnes & Noble's speculative fiction pick for June, and it is a blast. So it leans a little bit more fantasy, but still it's well written while still having fun. We follow a character named Gav, or as he is actually known, the Dread Lord Gavrax, Dark Wizard, and the Scourge feared by all. Well, he used to be, until he lost his memory. So he wakes up to a castle full of creatures, a princess locked in his dungeon, and truly no clue what to do with all of it. That's about all I'm going to give you, because there are some twists and turns and revelations that are very fun. But suffice to say, this is a delightful satire of all of those fantasy tropes that you have read over and over again, as well as a really thoughtful and smart look at identity and image and what that means to keep it up and reinvent yourself and hold true to people's opinions while still trying to be your own self. So please check out Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis. It's a blast. But that is all we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over, and please give us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss out. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. Pretty simple. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester. And Donald, where can we find you?
You can follow me at my home store at BN Fairlane Green.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.